Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Planning 101. On behalf of the City Planning Department at the City of Kitchener, I just want to say that we're pleased that so many of you took time out of your evening today to be here and learn a little bit more about city planning in Kitchener. Our department decided to create this course mainly because we have experienced a growing interest in land use planning, but also because we've heard from so many of you that you want to better understand the planning process and you want to be part of some of the decisions that are currently affecting our everyday lives. The objective of this course is to provide you, the public, with more insight into how planning works in Kitchener in the hopes that you can engage in the process in a more meaningful way. So welcome. This is the first time this course has been offered. This is our pilot, and it's our intention that going forward, this course will be launched more broadly to the public in 2021. Our aim is to deliver the course 3 times next year, as well as in the following years after that. Just a few logistical items before we get started. A few of you are part of a professional organization and would like learning credits for tonight's session. If you would like a certificate following this course, feel free to send me an email in the coming days and we will provide one. I'll make sure my email address is provided in the chat. In addition, feel free to enter any comments, questions, or suggestions into the chat, and my co-instructor Richard and I will answer the questions as we go along. And as a group, we can discuss some of the larger issues at the end of the night. So let's jump right in. Welcome to the Introduction to City Planning Kitchener edition. For many of you, this may be your first introduction to city planning. But for others, you may have participated in the planning process previously, and you might be here to learn a little bit more about it. Planning is really interesting, and this course is designed to offer you an overview of how the planning framework works, what's happening behind the scenes, and how we can come together as a community, as experts, and as stakeholders to help shape the future of Kitchener. So just to introduce you to myself and Richard tonight, my name is Dana Edwards. I'm Senior Planner of Urban Design at the City of Kitchener. I've worked at the city now for 6 years and previously have worked in Ottawa and Kingston. I did my master's degree in urban planning at Queen's University and my urban design certificate at Simon Fraser in Vancouver. I became a planner after traveling to really cool places like Brazil and Singapore and seeing how people gather, socialize, and interact in a very informal way in public spaces. And I wanted to develop something similar here in Canada. When I'm not working, I enjoy night photography and sketching.
Thank you, Dana, and good evening, everyone. My name is Richard Kelly-Ritz. I'm also a planner with the City of Kitchener. I started at the city when I was a student about 4 years ago on one of my co-op terms when I was doing my undergrad in planning at the University of Waterloo. I became interested in cities at a pretty young age, building Lego, drawing cities, and playing the SimCity video game franchise. When I was in high school, I discovered city planning as a career and I decided to pursue it. Outside of my working hours, I enjoy drone photography, playing sports, and reading nonfiction. Of course, one of my favorite places to visit in Kitchener is Saturday mornings in the downtown farmers market. So welcome to our course. Quick agenda for the evening. Our course today will run for about 90 minutes and will be divided into 2 main parts. The first part will be the presentation component, and the second portion will be dedicated to a question and answer period. Of the presentation component, so numbers 1 and 2 on your screen, it will be divided into 2 key sections. The first, number 1 on your screen, will give some background on current factors that are shaping how the City of Kitchener is growing. And the second will get into some more specifics about how planning works. This will discuss key planning legislation, get into specific examples of the different types of development processes that are used to plan our city, and give you, as a member of the public, some tangible ways about how to be and how to get involved in the development process. The last portion of our course, number 3, as mentioned, will be dedicated to the question and answer period. During this time, we will answer all of your questions from the course. Please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the Q&A dialog box in the Microsoft Teams window. We encourage you to ask us questions at any time during the course, and we will be responding to all of them at the last portion of our course tonight. Now, we'd like to note that when the concept for this course was first rolled out, we had every intention of delivering it in person, be it at City Hall or at a community center elsewhere in the city. Of course, given the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, those plans have changed, and we are very pleased to deliver this course in a virtual format and look forward to a future time when we can roll it out in person. So, who is this course for? What prerequisites do you need? Well, this course is designed for anyone with an interest in learning how the planning process works in Kitchener, or 2, for anyone who would like to learn about what opportunities there are to involve themselves in this planning process. And why take this course? What do you have to gain? Well, we can sell you on a couple main points. The first is that you'll gain more of an understanding about your city of Kitchener, how it's growing, and why it's growing that way. And the second, and this is perhaps the most important point, is that you'll gain the ability to feel more empowered as a citizen. Maybe sometime down the road, you'll get a letter in the mail notifying you about an official plan amendment or minor variance in your neighborhood. And having taken this course, you will be confident in what this means, how it fits into the bigger picture, and how to involve yourself to meaningfully impact change.
So what is planning? Planning is an important way to manage growth so that we meet the needs of our current communities, while at the same time safeguarding our future resources. As planners, we work with communities to define our vision, to protect life and safety, the environment, as well as to provide opportunities for places to live, places to work, and places to play. So let's talk about Kitchener and learn what is happening in city planning and how we are shaping the future of our city. As many of you know, Kitchener is currently undergoing a period of rapid change. In the early 60s through to the early 90s, the downtown grew by a rate of about 2 office towers per decade. The outside area was surrounded by larger apartment buildings, and while these were more numerous, they were still built relatively slow over the past 50 years. If we take a moment and we fast forward to the present, over the next 5 years, we are expecting approximately 19 new towers in the city. Not only that, but 11 of these 19 new towers would on their own qualify as the tallest building in downtown Kitchener. The times have really changed, and we're currently undergoing the largest development boom in Kitchener's history. So if we zoom out to a more national scale, Kitchener is one of the fastest growing cities in Canada. In 2018 and 2019, Waterloo Region grew by 2.8%, which outpaces the 2 fastest growing cities of London and Ottawa. Because we only have a limited amount of land left in our suburban area for housing, we're directing new development to our existing built-up area. Our city planning department, which is currently about 33 people, work on a variety of special planning projects, long-term growth planning, policy development, the review of complex development applications, just to name a few. Our staff is mainly made up of policy planners that work on the special policy projects, our development planners that review some of the complex development applications, as well as we have planners that are specialists that work on things like urban design, heritage, or environmental planning projects. One of the primary goals of land use planning in Canada is to create what we call complete communities. These are communities that aim to meet the basic needs of all residents, regardless of income, culture, or political beliefs, through integrated land use planning, through transportation planning, and through community design. In 2019, Kitchener Council declared a climate emergency, and this acknowledges that our future priorities should reflect taking a strong action to reduce our greenhouse gases that are currently warming the planet. As a city, we're working towards more sustainable planning policy, as well as more sustainable development goals. Until recently, Kitchener residents had access to a range of housing options. Now, nearly 80% of homes are affordable only to people with higher incomes. Safe and affordable housing is becoming more out of reach for some people within our community. The Kitchener Planning Division is currently working on an affordable housing strategy to bring more affordable housing to new developments and lands across the city. Kitchener has a limited supply of developable land, and in order to fight climate change, Kitchener will need to grow up, not out, and develop more on our existing land supply. Provincial, regional, and city policy outlines areas that are to be the focus for this intensification. These areas are generally in our urban areas, near transit, near schools, parks, and existing infrastructure. These areas are actually defined in the city's vision and growth document that's called the official plan. And lastly, Kitchener has a new transit system and is working on expanding our active transportation network, which includes our multi-use trails and our bike lanes. With this new transit comes an opportunity to ensure that transit is supportive and close to new development and walking distance to transit stops. Currently, we have 11 transit stops in Kitchener, and city planning are currently preparing master plans for these areas to encourage people who are living near transit to use their cars less frequently. Every great city needs passionate, informed, and engaged citizens. It's our hope that we can bring many new voices, experiences, and backgrounds into the planning process so that together we can build a city for everyone. Our next couple slides will look in detail at some of the factors that are informing our city building work.
So how does city planning actually work? What is city planning? A simple way to think about it could be that city planning is all of the work that is done before a project starts to be built. This process can sometimes take months or even years, depending on what is proposed. Almost all of planning occurs before a building permit can be issued, and it's this planning process that we will be talking about in our course today. Okay, so how does it work? Planning rules in Ontario are set out by the province of Ontario, and all cities in Ontario have to follow the same basic set of rules and policies. At the very top, the Ontario Planning Act is the piece of legislation that determines all of the specifics about how this is going to work. Later in our course, we will be talking about things such as the zoning bylaw and plans of subdivision. The Planning Act is the document that gives these things the authority to work. Also at the provincial level are other guiding documents under the Planning Act that give more specific direction on how cities should grow. For example, the provincial policy statement is updated every couple of years and has the latest bullet point style items about important provincial goals, such as protecting industrial areas and encouraging new growth to be in existing built-up areas of cities. The Places to Grow plan directs where the majority of new housing in Ontario will be. For example, there are many urban growth centers identified in Ontario as some of the areas with the most planned future growth. Downtown Kitchener is identified as one of these areas. Uptown Waterloo is as well. The Greenbelt Plan protects important environmental areas in Ontario from development and preserves that land to be used for things such as farming or protected environmental uses. There is much more limited development allowed in the Greenbelt. So we're starting at a very high level in terms of provincial planning policy. Let's bring it a little bit more into a local context. So as we know, our upper tier government here in the area is the Region of Waterloo. And their main planning document is the Region of Waterloo official plan. So that will take some of the high-level provincial goals and apply it a little bit more into a region of Waterloo specific context. Now, as we also know, there are many municipalities within the region of Waterloo. There's the City of Waterloo, City of Cambridge, more rural townships such as the Township of Woolwich, and of course, ourselves here at the City of Kitchener. And that is what we are going to be spending the next portion of our course talking about, is the planning tools available to guide growth here at the City of Kitchener level. And there are many of them. For today's course, we will be talking about 5 key planning tools at the City of Kitchener level. And those are the City of Kitchener Official Plan, Plans of Subdivision, the City of Kitchener Zoning Bylaw, Site Plans, and the Committee of Adjustment, which includes consents and minor variance applications. With a general understanding of these 5 key tools, you'll be able to get a pretty good sense about how the city planning process works. Now, it goes without saying, there are many other documents and policies that guide how the city is going to grow, and those all play an important supporting role into the City of Kitchener's growth. And those include documents such as Trails and Cycling Master Plans and the Urban Design Manual. So we are now going to give an overview of these 5 key planning processes that we've talked about. And chances are, almost everything you see that is built in Kitchener went through at least one of these processes at one time or another. This includes everything from the home you live in to the grocery store that you shop at. And to walk through these 5 tools, we're going to be using a hypothetical piece of land that we'll say exists in Kitchener. And you can see on here, we've got some farmland, and maybe that's stated for future development. Got a river going through, and the gray area, which would be the existing part of the city, we'll say. And we'll be using this plot of land to kind of give you a sense about how these 5 key planning tools work. And we're going to be starting with our first tool, which is the official plan. So the official plan is the broadest and highest level planning tool available at the City of Kitchener level. It's a document that sets out the entire vision for the City of Kitchener. And the official plan is a document that is approved first by Kitchener City Council and then by the region of Waterloo. And it really sets out a vision for how the City of Kitchener is going to grow. One thing to note about an official plan is that anytime it's going to be updated or a new official plan is going to be approved, a public meeting must be held. So there's the opportunity for anyone with an interest in this vision to kind of participate in the process and to provide input into it prior to it being brought forward for approval to City Council. Now, one of the most important things that the official plan can do is it sets out land uses in the entire city. So in the official plan document, there is quite literally a map contained in there of the whole city of the City of Kitchener. And on this map, there are various land uses assigned to every piece of property in the city. So for example, on our screen here, you can see a whole range of them. There's commercial, mixed use, agriculture, residential, institutional, so your churches, schools, community center. All that is set out in the official plan. And it will also contain within that document some language in terms of what might be allowed in that zone, or sorry, in that land use designation, and what the vision for it might be. So as mentioned, the official plan is approved by City Council and then the region of Waterloo. And anytime the official plan is updated, there is a public meeting that is held. So one thing to note is that the official plan is not a static document. It can and does change over time. Sometimes even, a private landowner may have a vision for a property that differs from the city's vision for that same property. In this case, the property owner might want to change, or what we call amend, the official plan in order to do something different with their property. And this is called an official plan amendment. And why would someone want to change the official plan? And why does the city allow it? Well, of course, ideally all development meets the official plan. However, it is recognized that the official plan is very broad, and sometimes when you get down to a specific property, another option might make sense in terms of development for that particular property owner. And that's what the purpose of an official plan amendment can be for. And there's a couple key things to note about official plan amendments. The first is that it must go through the same approval process as when the official plan was first passed. So there's a public meeting held, anyone with an interest on the change can provide input to it, and it finally gets approved by Kitchener City Council and then the Region of Waterloo. The second key thing to note is that the applicant who's interested in making the change through the official plan amendment must still demonstrate that it meets all of those other policies, those higher level ones that we talked about, such as the Region of Waterloo official plan and documents from the province, such as the provincial policy statement. So they couldn't just go changing the land use designation, as we call it, to whatever they wanted. They would still have to demonstrate that it meets those higher level policies that we've talked about. So that's the official plan in a nutshell. And we'll remind you to feel free to ask us questions about anything we're talking about in the Q&A dialog box, and we'll be responding to those at the end of the course. So the next tool we're going to be talking about is subdivisions. And the subdivision process is quite literally where land is subdivided into smaller lots. Most new residential lots in Kitchener were approved through a subdivision. So you can see on our screen here that the yellow portion, there's now some smaller boxes on there. Well, these are representative of new lots that were created in our hypothetical example through a plan of subdivision. And so creating lots is kind of the main purpose of that tool. Now, one thing to keep in mind of is that you'll see that the color underneath these lots is still yellow from the official plan, and yellow was residential. So the plan of subdivision process is not changing that underlying land use. It is just generally creating new lots with it. So anytime a plan of subdivision is proposed, there's a public meeting that's held, so it's a public process, and it is also approved again by Kitchener City Council. And the plan of subdivision process also gets into very detailed layouts of new neighborhoods. Where are the water pipes going to go? Where are the gas lines going to go? That sort of thing is all looked at in very fine detail during the subdivision process. Are there going to be transit stops? How many lanes? Will there be a bike route? That sort of thing is looked at through this process. So that's our second tool. So we've got the underlying land use that's set out in the official plan at a high level, got some lots created. So when it comes time to build, what sets out the rules for what can actually be built on these lots? And that's where we introduce our next tool, which is the zoning bylaw. So the zoning bylaw is the law for what can be built on a piece of property. It takes the broad policies from the official plan and creates very specific rules for every property in the city for what can be built there. It can cover things like how high a building can be, what its setbacks would have to be if somebody's building there. If you're building a restaurant, how many parking spaces are needed. That is prescribed in the zoning bylaw in very fine detail. The zoning bylaw also says exactly what can and cannot be built on a property. So it would say that you could allow on one particular property office, restaurant, and something like a nail salon or personal services. That's all prescribed in the zoning bylaw in great detail. If you live on a residential property in Kitchener, the zoning bylaw also sets out rules for decks, porches, additions, new sheds. It's a very detailed document. So just to give you a bit of a sense, so I mentioned the word setbacks. So that's one of many zoning terms that we use. And so I'll just show you quickly here what a setback might be, because that's one of the more common terms that comes up whenever you hear the word zoning bylaw or something associated with it. So we took this tool from the town of Markham, this graphic here. So you can see we've just got a standard lot. You've got your road, a driveway, a sidewalk, the property lines here around the house, got a garage, and then the main house as well. So the zoning would prescribe setbacks, and the setbacks is basically how far a building has to be from the property lines. So you could see it's got a front yard setback here, so maybe the zoning says it has to be 6 meters back. So if you looked up the zoning bylaw for this property, it would say the garage has to be 6 meters back from the front property line. Now, that's what we'd call a front yard setback. And there's a similar principle applied to the side yard setback, so how far it has to be from the side property line, and the same thing in the rear. So earlier in our course, we talked about official plan amendments. So that's where somebody is changing or applying to change the official plan on their property. If somebody wants to change the zoning bylaw on their property, they may do so as well. And that is through a process that we call a zoning bylaw amendment. And it's similar in the sense that you're changing what the approved zoning is on a particular property. And the zoning bylaw, when it's first passed, it has to be done through City of Kitchener Council, and there is a public meeting held for that as well. So anytime beyond that, if somebody wants to change the zoning on their property, they would have to do so through that same public meeting type process. And this is called, again, a zoning bylaw amendment. And there could be a number of reasons for this. Maybe they are proposing something on a property that is looking to do a little bit maybe more height than the zoning bylaw allows. And this kind of cuts us to our first video of our course, where we are going to be watching a video interview with a couple of our senior planners at the city, talking through in a little bit more detail what a zoning bylaw amendment is. All right, hi everyone. I'm here with two senior planners at the City of Kitchener, Katie Anderl and Andrew Pinnell. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion about the zoning bylaw amendment process in Kitchener. Katie, let's say someone is just looking for a little bit of background on what a zoning bylaw amendment is. How would you explain that to somebody?
So a zoning bylaw amendment really looks to change what you're allowed to do on your property. So for instance, if you would like to build something that is a different use than what's permitted, if it's a residential property you want to build commercial, or if it's something that you want to significantly change what your setbacks are, what your height, what your density, so how big, how tall your building is permitted to be. Usually the scope of a zoning bylaw amendment is fairly significant in terms of what the change is.
Andrew, can you think of an example of a zoning bylaw amendment that you've been involved with over the last couple of years?
One that comes to mind specifically is one I worked on recently, and it was a very complex process. It took about 2 years to complete. The zoning bylaw amendment requested to change the zoning in order to allow commercial development as well as a residential development on the same property. There were a number of retail stores that were proposed. I believe there were 7, including a large anchor store. There were 3 large apartment towers proposed, as well as 1 building that could end up being a mixed-use building of office and residential.
Andrew, who makes the decision on zoning bylaw amendment requests?
Zoning bylaw amendments are decided by City Council. And first, before they go to City Council, they go to what's called Planning and Strategic Initiatives Committee. That's a committee that's formed of Council, and they discuss the application usually a week in advance of the Council meeting, where the decision is actually made firm.
Katie, how would you explain planning staff's involvement in a zoning bylaw amendment?
So the planning staff's involvement is partially a file manager. So it's somebody who has care of the file from the time it's submitted by the applicant. But more importantly, the planner's role is as a professional to review the application, to hear the advice of the technical experts, to listen to the community, and ultimately to form a planning opinion about whether the proposal complies with the provincial policies that are in place, the regional policies, the city policies, and ultimately to make a recommendation to council about whether the proposal represents what we would call good planning.
How is the public typically involved in a zoning bylaw amendment process?
One of our very first steps is to send a letter to the neighboring property owners and people who live in the neighborhood. We also put up a sign on the site that advises you that an application's been made to change the zoning of a property. If there's interest in an application and if there's questions and comments that might come in, planning staff will organize what we call a neighborhood information meeting. And this meeting is an opportunity for the neighborhood to come out to meet with city planners, to meet with other staff who are involved in the application, and also to meet with the developer or the project proponent and their consultants and talk about the application, to provide their comments, ask questions, and get some answers. After the neighborhood meeting, staff will continue to work with the applicant and with the neighborhood to help resolve issues and questions and concerns that have arisen through the comment process. And ultimately, at the time planning staff prepare a report, the application will go for what we call a formal public meeting. And the public meeting takes place at Committee of Council, and that planning committee is an opportunity for residents to come, register as a delegation, and speak directly to council and to councillors about what their questions, concerns might be, or if they're in support of an application, to voice that as well.
Andrew, what might happen in the year or 2 following a zoning bylaw amendment that is approved by City Council?
So in the year or 2 following the approval of a zoning bylaw amendments, the developer would typically undertake steps to implement the concept that council approved through the zoning bylaw amendment. And that takes place through the site plan approval process. So that's a process whereby the city receives an application that looks at the physical structure of the building, the location on the lot line, the design of the outside of the building. So it's a very detailed process, and typically takes between 6 months to 8 months sometimes to achieve what developers typically are looking for, which is a building permit to actually construct.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. Thank you very much to Katie and Andrew for their time, and hopefully the zoning bylaw amendment process is a little bit clearer to everyone.
Thanks, Richard.
So much, Richard.
So once the zoning is applied to a property and someone comes in and they want to build on that property, site plan is actually the final process that the applicant would go through before construction can start. So site plan control is a tool that's used by the city to make sure land is developed and designed in a way that's appropriate, that's safe, that's functional, as well as minimizes any potential impacts that the development may have on neighboring properties. So when a development proposal is first submitted, city staff would review that proposal for compliance with city policies and standards. And to give an example of some of those could be the official plan, could be the zoning bylaw, urban design guidelines, development manual, parks, plans, and policies, as well as fire and transportation documents. Things like built form, building placement, parking, outdoor space are all some of the things that are reviewed against the standards that are set out in our zoning bylaw, but also in our urban design manual. Staff will then provide feedback and recommendations, and then we'll collaborate with the applicant's design team to achieve the best possible outcome. Once some of the larger details are sorted out, an application is granted what we call in the City of Kitchener approval in principle. The applicant would then work with staff to develop out some of the finer details, and that might be things like landscaping, outdoor amenity space, as well as some of the lighting details. In addition, planning staff would work with fire, transportation, building staff to develop and refine some of the details, such as the parking layout, access, safety, and other things. And if staff support our final design, the site plan is approved. And one thing to note about the site plan process is it's our only planning process that doesn't require public engagement. So once the zoning for a property is approved, any application that meets the zoning and that the details can be worked out through site plan can be approved outside of a public engagement process and can be approved through the site plan committee. And a site plan committee that we have at the City of Kitchener is a delegated authority by council, and they would make the final decision. This structure is one that's commonly observed in many municipalities across Ontario. So in addition, the site plan application can only be appealed to the LPAT, which is the Local Planning Appeals Tribunal, by the applicant, and that's the person that makes the application. So this is different from the other planning applications that Richard has been touching on today, which the appeal can be made by any member of the public. So I just wanted to clarify that. In a following video, one of our urban designers, Adam, will explain some of the things that planning staff review as part of the site plan process.
So this next video, the volume is a little bit quieter, so on your end, if you're able, maybe just increase the volume for just this video.
Hi, my name's Adam and I'm an urban designer at the City of Kitchener. And this is Jerry. As a project goes through the site plan process, a number of interconnected factors are considered, negotiated, and finalized. Planning staff, along with staff from transportation, building, engineering, parks, and other departments, review submissions against our zoning, policies, and guidelines in a collaborative process with the applicant to ensure we're creating a high-quality built environment and meeting all of our strategic targets for things like sustainability, density, affordability, and design excellence. In this hypothetical scenario, we have a block of the downtown. All of the buildings with a little green piece of tape on top of them, we're going to consider those as existing buildings, including this tower here in the corner. The proposal that we're looking at is this piece in the middle. So one thing that the planner will do is examine this proposal against the zoning bylaw. In this case, maybe this setback here is not meeting what the zoning bylaw requires. And so we'll make a recommendation to push that setback back so that's in line with these other buildings along the street, creating that consistent street wall. The next thing we might want to consider is the provision of public amenity space, green space, that kind of thing. In this case, we might want to create a little bit of a parklet here that people in the public can use. And so we'll make a recommendation to change the built form so that we carve out this space. And then we'll work with the consultant, the developer, and the landscape architect to design this in a way that has the best function, high quality landscaping, hardscaping, and other elements that make it a really great, vibrant space for people to be in. From here, we might examine the built form to make sure that it meets all of our objectives. In this case, we have a tower proposed for the middle of the site as shown here, with an existing tower neighboring and an existing 8-story building on the other side. In this case, you can see we're actually quite close, and so we might want to work with the tower design to help to alleviate those pressures. So the first thing that we might want to do is actually reduce the size of this tower footprint. a bit long at the moment for this kind of context with so much going on around it. And so we might ask the developer to substitute that out for something a little bit more constrained, such as this. Now with this more compact tower, what we have created is more space between the two towers and more space between the tower and the mid-rise beside it. However, we still have significant impacts on overload. You can still see from units in one tower into units in the other tower. So the next thing that we might want to do is change the tower placement so that we alleviate that. If we move this tower over this direction, now you can see what that does is it provides separation and clearance between this tower and this tower and this tower and the mid-rise building. So now there are no longer units looking into one another. The next thing we might want to do is take a look at the orientation of the tower to make sure that the shadow impacts are minimized as much as possible on the streetscape here. In this case, with the long edge facing to the north, what we want to do is reorient that tower so that a more slender shadow gets cast onto the streetscape. So in this case, it makes a lot of sense to rotate this tower 90 degrees so that the more slender edge of the tower is what's casting the shadow here. Now, with all of these changes, what we've done is really reduce the density by quite a lot. And sometimes that's desirable, but sometimes it's not. In this case, it might make sense to add more height to the tower because we've created a more slender tower that has fewer impacts on its surrounding environment. We can sort of give back some of that development through more height. And that's the way that we negotiate around these issues to make sure that we have a viable project for the developer, something that meets the city's zoning guidelines and other expectations, and something that meets the community's expectations for excellence.
So far in our course, we've talked about 4 of the big planning processes: official plans and official plan amendments, plans of subdivision, the zoning bylaw and zoning bylaw amendments, and site plan control. As a refresher, official plans, subdivisions, and zoning bylaws are decided by City Council, and there would be a public meeting held, while site plans are approved by a site plan committee through an internal, so not a public process. Now, what if smaller changes are proposed on a property that don't necessarily need to be decided at City Council, but are important enough to warrant a public process? And that is where the Committee of Adjustment comes in. The Committee of Adjustment is a group of typically 3 to 5 people, and they are appointed by City Council to make decisions on small land use matters. And there's 2 main processes that they deal with. The first is consents for lot division, and the second is minor variances. And we will be going through both of those processes right now. So a consent for lot division is where one lot is divided into 2 or more new lots. You may be wondering, earlier in our course, we talked about plans of subdivision, which also creates new lots. So what's the difference? And you'd be right in thinking that. Plans of subdivision and consents for lot division both create new lots. And even further than that, when planning staff and council are considering whether those new lots should be created, the guidelines and the criteria for that are the same for both processes and are contained in the Provincial Planning Act that we talked about at the beginning of our course. So what's the difference? Well, the plan of subdivision process is much larger. That will create your brand new neighborhoods, lay out your roads, your stormwater pipes, your gas lines. It's very large. By contrast, consent for lot division is really only one small property at a time. Rarely will you ever create new roads through this process, and you'll often only create 1 or 2 new lots. So let's say hypothetically, this property owner owned one larger lot and they wanted to divide it into 2 new lots. So they would make an application, which would ultimately be decided at the Committee of Adjustment to decide whether or not that new lot should be created. As part of this process, there would be a mail out to the neighborhood informing them and allowing them to participate in this process and provide input to the Committee of Adjustment as to their perspective on it and any concerns that they might have. There's also an ad that goes in the paper, and there's notices posted on our website as well. So let's say in our case here, all is well, an application is brought forward, and there's no major concerns. Well, the Committee of Adjustment could approve the application, and a new lot would be created, which then the owner could build one new house on each. So that's the consent for lot division process, which the Committee of Adjustment deals with. The second process they deal with is minor variance applications. So let's say the new house on the left wanted to build a front porch. So the first question they'd ask is, well, what are the rules for building a front porch? And we talked about this earlier. It is contained in the zoning bylaw. So the zoning bylaw sets out the rules for what can be built, and that includes a front porch. So let's say they look up the rules for the zoning bylaw, and it says that the front porch must be 3 meters, must have a 3-meter setback. Remember, we talked about that term earlier. A 3-meter setback from the front property line. So it has to be away from the street, basically, by 3 meters. Now, maybe for one reason or another, maybe this property is a little bit tighter, maybe they want to build it closer to the street for some reason. In order to do that, they would have to change the zoning bylaw effectively. And earlier in our course, we talked about the process to do this, which is a zoning bylaw amendment. However, something like this is very small and may not warrant as complex of a process as a zoning bylaw amendment. This is the type of thing that may be more appropriate for a minor variance application. And that's the second main process that the Committee of Adjustment deals with, is minor variances. For our next video and our final video, we will be watching one of our senior planners, Tim Donagany, providing an overview about the minor variance process in a little bit more detail.
Hi there, my name is Tim Donagany. I'm a senior planner at the City of Kitchener. One thing I want to talk to you about today is the minor variance process. So as you might know, the city has a zoning bylaw that sets out in a really precise way how buildings and land can be used in the city. So the permitted uses, that could be a single detached dwelling or a commercial building with retail, but it also says how tall a building could be, where it's located on the site, the amount of parking that may be required, and all those are set out in a lot of detail. Because of that level of detail, sometimes it's not possible for a specific development application to meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw. Sometimes that's because of the dimensions of the lot don't really work with the way that the zoning bylaw was drafted. It could also be because it doesn't work for a lot of other reasons, like existing conditions on the site. So in those cases where a development can't meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw precisely, there's an opportunity to apply for a minor variance. One that I've done in the past and is pretty common really is one where to say there's a single detached dwelling. Typically 1.2 meters is a permitted side yard, but let's say this lot is sort of pie shaped, so it's a little bit narrower in the back, and the homeowner wants to do an addition in the rear. That rear addition, because the lot sort of narrows down in the back, means that it's too small, too close to the property line. So in that way, a minor variance might be appropriate. When we look at a minor variance, there's 4 things that we need to consider. One is that minor variance, does it meet the general intent of the official plan? Is what they're proposing in line or not in line with what we're looking to see on that property? The other one's the general intent of the zoning bylaw. The third test is it minor in nature? So when we're evaluating an application for a minor variance, we can ask, is it really minor, or is it really something more major that should go through a zoning bylaw amendment application process, which is more in depth, takes more time, money, but it's also a more thorough review. And the last piece is it desirable for the appropriate use of the land or the building? Your application would need to meet all 4 of those tests. If it fails on any of them, then the minor variance can't be approved. we could look at, does the requested variance for a smaller side yard meet the general intent of the official plan? Well, does it meet the character of the neighborhood? Is it low rise? Does it meet some of those objectives about what we want that zoning bylaw or that area of the city to look like? And in many cases, I'm thinking in this instance of a request for a smaller side yard, that's probably okay if they're in the low rise residential designation. Now, the intent of the zoning bylaw, well, why does the zoning bylaw require a 1 meter side yard? There's a couple of reasons. One, we want to make sure that there's sufficient space for drainage in between that house and the neighboring house. There's not going to be any drainage issues. Is there ability to still maintain your house and your neighbor's house? So that 1.2 meter side yard lets you get a ladder up, fix the siding, paint the windows. That's all possible without going onto your neighbor's property. So long as that building isn't too high, that continues to be possible. So when we look at evaluating whether an application is minor in nature, it's not really just a matter of what's the number of the variance. So is it 100%? Is it 5% smaller? That's not necessarily the determination of minor. So it's really the impact of that variance that we're analyzing rather than just, in numbers, circumstances, is it a lot or a little different than the zoning bylaw? When we're evaluating, is the application desirable for the appropriate use of the land or the building? Is it really going to disrupt the streetscape in a way that has negative impacts? And we can look at that. In this example, the addition was to the rear of the house, so you couldn't really tell the difference. In this example, yes, I think it met all those tests and the intent of the zoning bylaw. So the Committee of Adjustment is a committee, and they're the ones that make decisions on these issues. So they're in a committee that's appointed by council, and they're usually people with experience in planning or real estate, and they make these decisions on council's behalf. They also get an opportunity to hear from the neighbors. So when you apply for a minor variance, we notify your neighbors as well as put a property up on the sign to let them know what you have proposed. That gives an opportunity for the committee to hear from the neighbors about what they think, if it's appropriate or if it has problems. At the end of this, there's an opportunity for someone to appeal the decision to the local planning appeals tribunal. So if the homeowner isn't happy with the committee's decision or one of the neighbors isn't happy, that decision can be appealed to a higher body. So that's my explanation of how the minor variance process works. Again, it's really a simple way to deal with minor changes to the zoning bylaw that don't require a full-fledged zoning bylaw amendment, but it does have a public process. There's opportunities for the neighbors to get involved, and it can speed things up compared to the other processes.
So that wraps up our summary of 5 of the key planning processes. So you might be wondering how you can get involved in the planning process in Kitchener and how you can be part of some of the exciting change that's currently happening. First and foremost, we want to encourage you to get involved when we're updating our official plan or our zoning bylaws. These are the high-level documents that guide the future change. These documents are also updated relatively infrequently, and the changes that happen at this level will guide new development happening in the years down the road. If you're in close proximity to a property that's currently undergoing a development application, you will receive a letter in the mail. And if you receive this letter, we encourage you to come out and participate, as well as to provide comments as part of the planning application. In addition, the city advertises special projects, planning policy changes, and development applications on properties via signage, in the newspaper, online, as well as via social media. We hope that you attend future public meetings, whether they be online or in person, where we will review proposed changes to our policy documents as well as development applications. In addition, we welcome you to visit our website, to make an appointment to visit us in the office at any time, or to send us an email at planning@kitchener.ca. So as I mentioned, here's an example of a sign that we currently post on the property. You will see that it has a map that shows the location where the development is proposed, a rendering that shows what is proposed, a little bit of information about the number of stories and units, as well as a contact information for a planner and information about a public meeting. So this concludes our presentation tonight, and I want to take a moment to thank you all for taking the time to participate, for showing interest in the planning process, and being part of the changing city. This is the first presentation and planning pilot course that we have currently prepared, but we're hoping to have more come in the future. So if you take a minute, please type any questions in the chat. Richard and I will begin answering them in a few moments. And while we're going to have a discussion for the remainder of the time online, we're hoping in the future that we'll be able to have this discussion in person and with all of you again. Thank you. So one question I would like to start with, thank you everyone that's posted a question so far. Really great discussions. We're trying to answer them via text, but there's one that I think I'll start with that we can elaborate on. And it says, what if a proponent doesn't like the planner's brilliant suggestions on how to create more green space to reduce impact on nearby buildings or other things? Can the planner insist that the proponent accept these changes? So that's a very good question. And I think it depends on what some of these changes are. We have policy documents at the city, the official plan, the zoning bylaw, as well as the urban design manual that outline how we expect development to proceed in Kitchener. In addition to these, we have regional documents that outline expectations for development for growth in the region, as well as provincial planning documents that spell out transit numbers and how we should grow kind of as a province. And so what we do as a city planner when we get an application, we look at how it conforms to these policies and these guidelines that we currently have. And if it doesn't meet with that, we address that with the applicant. We usually bring the design team around the table and say, here's our goals and objectives, this is what we're looking to have. If there's something clearly written in this official plan of zoning bylaw, we work with the applicant on those things to make changes, and we have the ability to say, you know, this is what you need to change in order to comply with our documents. If it's something that's a little more open to interpretation, or it somewhat meets it, but we don't feel it's meeting it enough, this is when we have kind of a negotiation with the developer and we say, here's our goals, here's the studies that we've done, here's where we need to be. And we work through that kind of together collaboratively through the process. And I think that's a little bit why Andrew in his presentation said that the timing can vary anywhere from 6 to 8 months or longer even. So I think that's it kind of depends. But at the City of Kitchener, we often work through a collaborative approach and want to work with the proponent to create a development that works for the local community as well as planning staff. So I hope that kind of answers the question in more detail. Another question we have is for the Committee of Adjustment regarding minor variances and the 4 tests. Is there a limit on the number of variances that someone can apply for? Let's say I want to adjust the setback, reduce parking of a taller building. Is it minor? And I think one thing to note is that every variance is looked at, whether it's minor, it's not the cumulative number of variances. So each variance would be assessed based on those 4 tests. So there is no limit in the number of variances that can be made on an application. However, each one would be looked at individually under the 4 tests.
Yeah, I can kind of build on the question about the minor variances too. Like like Dana mentioned, it's each variance, if each request meets the 4 tests, you could have, in theory, a lot of them. I've seen upwards of 4 or 5 variances as part of one application, and it's perfectly fine. They're all pretty small and meet the tests. You could even have a case where somebody's asking for 1 minor variance and it may not meet the test, and like that's it. Whereas you could have one that's asking for 5, and it's a pretty easy approval process. So it really depends on what's asked for. So that's kind of the uniqueness about that type of process.
So we have one question that says, regarding minor variances, which is a popular topic tonight. It says, is it a City of Kitchener practice to put up signs and notices, or is that legislated in the planning legislation? So that's both. It is legislated in the Planning Act regarding posting signs, and it is the City of Kitchener's practice to put up signs and notices. Secondly, does anyone oversee Committee of Adjustment decisions to see that citizens are making good decisions? It seems like a lot of responsibility to people who may or may not be keeping up with planning legislation. Yeah, so variances and Committee of Adjustment decisions are actually flagged either through the building process, through occupancy permits, or when someone comes in wanting to do something. So what happens is, perhaps like in the example of a driveway widening, they might come in for a permit for that, and staff would say, okay, well, this doesn't meet the zoning bylaw, therefore you would be required a variance. So usually that's how that is flagged. People come in and city staff say, okay, you would need a variance for one of many things to the zoning bylaw. So the onus isn't on citizens around making good decisions and coming through. It's usually flagged at the city level when an application comes in for a whole variety of things. One thing could be they want to do a shed, and they come in with an application based on where they're planning to put the shed. They might need a variance. So there's a whole number of things, and the city often flags that to the applicant. We have another question that says, are there differences between different planning documents? Is there a hierarchy of which must be followed? For example, zoning bylaw says one thing and a heritage plan says another, which is followed. Generally, our planning documents should align. The zoning bylaw is actually law, so it's a legal document, and if it isn't followed to the letter of that law, then that's when a variance would be required. So there's no flexibility around that, around the zoning regulations generally. The heritage plan should align with our zoning bylaw. If there's a discrepancy, then oftentimes it's up to the planning director that makes that call. And usually it's just around interpretation or working through some of the finer details. There isn't really a hierarchy in terms of which one supersedes another. However, the official plan is the guiding document for the city's vision for growth. And a lot of the other documents like the zoning bylaw, as well as the urban design guidelines, are tools that are used to implement the official plan. So there might be some regulations around some of the zoning details that are in zoning, which means it needs to be followed 100% of the time. If not, it needs a variance. Or if it's more design related, it might be in the urban design manual. And that is a little more flexible as we work through good design on applications, because there's a whole host of things that could constitute urban design or good urban design. And it's possible that a regulation could be in both, could be in the zoning as well as the urban design guidelines. So there's not really a hierarchy. However, there is the overarching official plan that the city currently has.
Yeah, a couple other questions, 2 similar ones actually, one from Mario and one from Donna. What are the qualifications to be a member of the Committee of Adjustment? So both great questions. So members of the Committee of Adjustment are appointed by Kitchener City Council. And usually it's with somebody who will just have background in kind of how land use planning works, whether it's real estate or maybe they were a planner before. So usually it's just some familiarity with the land use planning process.
We often post that online when we're looking for committee members, and so I think like there's a lot of community appointments for the Committee of Adjustment. So it's likely that, you know, if you're keen on planning and you've taken this course, for example, then you can apply to be on the Committee of Adjustment.
See a question from Dave. How is the city encouraging the developers of these high-rise buildings to include low-cost housing provisions in their structures? Yeah, great, very timely question, Dave. So Dana mentioned briefly, city's working on a number of initiatives right now related to affordable housing. The challenge right now is there's really no mechanism, so to speak, for us to require affordable units to be provided in new buildings. The province does allow cities to require this through something what's called inclusionary zoning. So that's where if a new building is built, the zoning would require a certain amount of those to be affordable units. So over the next couple of years, we're looking at rolling this out in some areas around our transit stations, but that's still just kind of a work in progress in terms of what exactly that looks like.
So we have a question around whether the presentation will be available online, slides and verbal. We're probably not going to be posting the slides right away. Our intention is that in 2021, we roll this presentation out more broadly to the general public in 3 live sessions. And the reason around that is that I think the presentation benefits from having this discussion, but also from having, you know, us presenting it versus just kind of going through the slides online. We are looking into having recordings available online as well, or available in the future for those that can't make the session. So we're trying to do both, and we're hoping that it's available in 2021. And we have another question from Peter who says, how does the city incentivize property owners to develop in accordance with the master plan? For example, I live near a large parking lot and the master plan has been slated for higher density residential, but I don't think the private landowner is interested. That's a really great question. We develop these master plans kind of as a start, as a first priority. And then what we do is take the land use designation, or I guess land use that's in the master plan, and develop that into official plan policy, as well as zoning, as well as urban design guidelines. And those 3 things together are generally used to incentivize the developer to develop something that works with the community. So usually there's a lower end of the density that says like this is your minimum and this is your maximum. And then there's guidance along some of the regulations around how do you encourage the developer to work within that minimum and maximum. But I think it's from our perspective, it's through kind of those 3 documents. One, I guess, way to encourage that is to say, you know, if you meet those policies, you can go through the process very easily. If you want to develop outside the process or outside what the framework is, it's a lot harder for a developer, and it takes a lot more time. So I think having good policy, having good zoning, and having good design guidelines in place that meet the vision of what the community wants and what the city wants is the ultimate incentive around ensuring that we get good development in the city.
Yeah, the other thing to kind of think about, Peter, is that the cool thing about planning is that it's like it's not just for the next couple of years, like it's long term. Like some of our planning documents talk about like what the city is going to look like in like 30 years, and that some of these master plans do that as well. So for example, in this case, just because somebody owns it now doesn't mean they're going to own it forever, right? So maybe 10 years down the road, they might put it up for sale. And then people might look at that property, and when they're doing that, they'll see that, oh, you know, the city has this plan for high density. So it might just attract those types of people to buy it next. And then ideally longer term, it does end up, you know, having something built in line with that master plan. Question from Kay about citizens who make up on the Committee of Adjustment. Does anyone check to see they aren't just favoring their friends, but are following the planning legislation and making appropriate decisions? Yes, and that's a great, important question, Kay. So, yeah, something like that. So if, you know, I'm a member of the Committee of Adjustment, and one of my friends has a minor variance application before me, we would call that a conflict of interest, and they would be required to declare that. And so they would basically withdraw from any input or any decision on that variance or application, and it would be left then to the remaining members of the Committee of Adjustment to make a decision. And I've seen this happen a couple of times where a member of the Committee of Adjustment, you know, because oftentimes they will work in the land use planning field, and maybe someone they work with closely comes up for an application, they will declare the conflict of interest and withdraw from that one. I see kind of a related one from Donna. How stringently is conflict of interest followed up? So as far as planners are concerned, Dana and I would fall under the kind of professional planner umbrella. So we have very strong code of ethics that, you know, talks about how you cannot be in a conflict of interest, and if you are, you have to declare it. So in terms of our profession, how that would be enforced is, you know, there might be a complaint made against the planner, and then our professional planning body would look into it. And in a worst case scenario, you could have your planning license, so to speak, kind of removed, or you might have a penalty of some kind. So it is something that our profession takes very seriously.
So another question we have is around whether the city can require sustainability or energy efficiency be included in the development. So one thing that we have done over the past few years is develop a requirement for a sustainability statement as part of a development application. We currently have sustainability policies in our official plan, as well as in our design manual. And what we do is ask the applicant to outline how their application meets these policies and objectives, and how they are including sustainability into their application or into their development. In addition, there's some forms of energy efficiency built into the building code that they would need to meet, but this goes a little bit further and looks at how sustainability is being factored into the application. And I think this is a good thing from our perspective. We can look at what tools the applicant is considering in terms of sustainable development. And it helps us kind of plan for the future to know what are some of the things that we're achieving and what are some of the things that we need to look at building on more in the future. Another question we have from Donna is about our secondary plans. So where does the secondary plan for the neighborhoods fit into your explanation? So that's a good question. We had talked about those plans prior to tonight, about whether we would touch on them as part of this presentation. We only had so much time, and there's so much to planning, and I think that would be a great topic for a future course. But currently what the secondary plans are is, back in the 70s, secondary plans were done, which are basically an added layer to the official plan that has more detail for certain areas of the city. And with our station area planning that happened over the past 5 years, we noticed that a lot of these secondary plans hadn't been updated in a long time, and were also kind of located within the geography of the station area plans or the LRT. So what we had done is we had started the planning process for updating some of these secondary plans within these station areas. So currently, as a city, what we're doing is undergoing the update to these plans to ensure that the policies as well as the zoning in these areas are creating communities that are transit supportive, as we have the light rail in many of these areas. So that process is currently ongoing. So a lot of you tonight have been probably already involved and are currently going to be involved in secondary plans in your neighborhood. So it's a very good question. That process is currently underway, and more information about the secondary plan process can be found online.
Seeing another question, there was no mention on cost of a minor variance application or a zoning amendment application. What would these costs be? So the minor variance application is a fixed fee. It's in the 2020, it is, I think, $1,287 or something like that. Consent for lot division, which we touched on, I think that's in the $1,500 range. Zoning and bylaw amendments are much more significant. And I think they're upwards of $10,000 to apply for one of those applications. See, question from Ashley. How often are these documents, so official plans, zoning bylaws, updated or revised? Is this laid out in the Planning Act? So yeah, the official plan and the zoning bylaw, they can be updated, you know, every couple of years, sometimes in small ways or sometimes in more significant ways. You know, if somebody applies for an official plan amendment or a zoning bylaw amendment, like we talked about, that is a change to those documents, and those happen every year. So like we mentioned, they're kind of always evolving over time. Sometimes we'll add new regulations in response to something that we're seeing in the community. Like we heard over the last couple of years, some of you may be familiar with our new setback rules that we've implemented in central neighborhoods for zoning. So that's where if a new house is being built, so like a tear down and a rebuild, the setback of that new house has to be very similar to the properties next door. So we've implemented that in zoning. Is this laid out in the Planning Act? So yeah, there are some timelines laid out for, you know, how often the official plan would have to be updated. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I think it's every 5 or 10 years. Do you know that number, Dana?
Not off the top of my head. I think it's 5 years.
Yeah, okay. And question from Catherine, what level of government or which official plan sets the density targets for development in the city? And great question, Catherine. So a lot of our direction for density targets come from the province of Ontario. And those are kind of trickled down to the region official plan and then to the city official plan and ultimately in the zoning a lot of the times.
So Mario says, why do we rely on developers to build affordable housing? They have a maximized profit model. A lot of European countries have learned this and are designing buildings and housing themselves. Why can we not do this? I agree with you, Mario. It's a challenging position. I have seen in my research many countries, either in Europe or even Singapore, which have been leaders in developing affordable housing. By having either in Singapore's situation, the nation state doing this housing development, as well as other governments designing and developing housing for everyone. That's not the model here in Canada. I mean, we don't have a country that's developing affordable housing. What we do have is a tool called Inclusionary Zoning, which a lot of municipalities are currently looking at and the province is looking at, providing permissions for, and that is allowing a certain percentage of affordable housing units or requiring a certain percentage of affordable housing units in new developments. So that is something, that is a tool we will have to, you know, I guess force developers to consider a portion of affordable housing. And currently right now this is being thought of in, I guess, the station areas or transit areas. But I do agree, I think more is needed, and we are currently in an affordable housing, I guess, crisis, maybe to say, to put it in a certain way, but I mean, it's something we're looking to do, is to strive to how to make more affordable housing. So I agree. I think it's a problem that is not just a Kitchener problem, but a problem planners across Ontario as well as planners across Canada are grappling with. So yeah. We also say, I agree with you, Mario, from your perspectives. If you wanted to move towards building affordable housing via public fund, which level of government would we need to lobby? I'm not quite sure, but I would say that a good thing to do would be to contact your member of parliament and let them know that this is the way that you think we should be looking at dealing with our affordable housing problem. I know as city planners within Kitchener, we're looking at how we can make change within our current system. So Richard and I are looking at how we can encourage affordable housing through our developments. We do have a segment of our city staff looking at the affordable housing strategy or housing strategy for Kitchener. However, Richard and I cannot, make that change across Canada. So I think what the best thing to do would be to either take a look at our affordable housing strategy for Kitchener, as well as to contact your member of parliament to try to make change on a more national scale. And I think Richard here has provided a link to our current housing strategy for those that are interested in following along with that project. So far we've had a great discussion, and I really enjoyed these questions. Part of me wishes we could do it in person because I love having more of a dialogue and hearing less of myself and Richard talking. But thank you, it's been wonderful. We're going to stay on for a little while longer. We have until 9 tonight. So thank you to everybody who has stayed on. For the Q&A, if you have any other questions, feel free to type them in. We're always excited to talk about planning and planning in Kitchener, so feel free to throw them our way and we'll answer them over the next half an hour.
Yeah, these have been some great questions that we've gotten, so thanks to everyone for thought-provoking questions to us.
We have a question that says, in the late 80s, did we not have consultant planning groups that did help community groups and housing? That predates my time, but it's possible. I know we did have some policies back in the 80s that was a little bit more permissive around making affordable housing or community housing. I can't elaborate on that. Maybe you want to provide a little more information about what you're referring to. Oh, develop housing.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I'll have to float that by some of our other colleagues.
Yeah, if you send me an email, I can look into it and check out. I mean, ask some colleagues that have been around in the planning world a little longer than I have. The late 80s kind of predates my time as a planner, fortunately. Richard as well.
Just seeing as this is a pilot course, a question from Ashley, will you be sending out follow-up information by email? Yes, I think we will be. So stay tuned for that in the next week or two.
Yeah, like we had said, we appreciate any feedback. This is the pilot. We will be taking this course to the public in a much larger scale with many more people in 2021. Since you all have experienced the first course, the pilot, we would welcome any suggestions or feedback. So feel free to send myself or Richard an email. My email has been provided in the chat. However, we can both provide our emails here at the end. So you can send us any feedback or any suggestions for improvement or things that we should do as we go forward. This is the first course that we've offered since Planning 101. Richard and I realized as we started making this course and as we consulted with council as well as other members of the community that there's so much more that we could touch on. And we are trying to keep this course to the basics. Our intention is that in the future we will roll out maybe a Planning 102 or a Planning 103 that has a little bit more information going forward with more detailed courses on other things that we can discuss in planning, such as secondary plans or maybe about appeals or the LPAT or other things like that, or as we go through a development application. So I think that's the intent, is that we build on this in the future and that we hold more Planning 101 courses in the new year. Our intent at this point is about 3 per year, so 3 courses per year, and that will be very broadly advertised across the city. This one was kind of advertised more to community groups and neighborhood associations. So thank you for all of you for being, for test piloting our first course. Again, I know some of you would like a certificate, and if that is you, feel free to drop me an email tomorrow or the rest of this week, and we will be compiling and creating certificates and sending them back out. So we will be following up with people that do want a certificate as well.
See a question, with thousands of new residents soon to move into the many new downtown high-rises, where are you planning further green spaces downtown? Victoria Park is maxed out in the summer. Yeah, no, that's certainly, I agree with you completely. And I think most planning staff would, and even staff at the city, I think that's going to be a challenge for downtown moving forward, is, where to get that amenity space. Victoria Park is great. It's a beautiful amenity to have downtown. But certainly I think it's, something that we're looking at to try and find more space downtown. It's difficult because there's not a lot of, open areas that you could just build a new park in. I know there's some new developments downtown that are providing what's called like privately owned public space. So one of the new towers on Duke Street is doing that in the front of their building a little bit, where that can be some space that's used by the public. Also, there's the new park, I forget what it's called, Dana, at Queen and Duke as well, which is just the Boglesland Green, I think, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's another space that's opened up. So yeah, great question. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Dana.
Yeah, I guess in addition to that, we've outlined where there is a need in certain geographies within our master plan. And as planners, it's hard for us to say, this property is going to be designated park because, there's unintended consequences of that, for acquiring that piece of property from a real estate transaction perspective. But what we do is we have outlined areas in our stationary plans where we have deficiencies of park land, and we are going to be working towards acquiring lands in these areas to create more park space. And it's a challenge. It involves purchasing property, which is very expensive under the current circumstances. But the city is going to have to create a plan going forward with the growth that we're experiencing, not just in our downtown, but in our other growth areas across the city. So it is something that we are looking at going forward. We still have some time if anyone has any other questions, things they want to chat about, things they've always wondered about planning problems that keep them up at night.
One interesting initiative just off the top of my head that to keep an eye out in the next couple of years, and you've probably heard of it already, is the like laneway housing or additional dwelling units that be allowed on properties in Kitchener. So the province has required that most properties with a single house on it be allowed through the zoning to have a a backyard coach house unit. And so the city's looking at rolling that out in the next year or two. So that'll be kind of potentially an exciting new way to get some more housing stock into our city.
If you're one of those people looking to do an additional dwelling unit, Richard is the person you want to contact at the city. He has prepared a fact sheet about it, about how you can go about doing that, and has a lot of great information about moving forward. So if that's something you're interested in, Richard's the person you want to contact. All right, we have another question. I recently learned that the City of Vancouver has said that by 2025, all new buildings must be zero net carbon. Is Kitchener moving that way? Is that what the sustainability statement looks like? So that's a great goal from the City of Vancouver. I would like it if we could have a similar goal or something just as ambitious. At this time, Kitchener doesn't have a target such as that. Our sustainability statement is a start. So it's acknowledging that sustainability should be built into every new development, and it's up to the applicant to flag what that looks like. And then staff review it and say, could we do something more? Could we go beyond that? But currently we don't have any hard and fast requirements at this time in terms of energy efficiency that's built into buildings or targets for 2025 or beyond. So it's something that we are looking at. If you feel that this is really strong or you feel like this is really important, it's always a great thing to mention to your counselor that this is what you think Kitchener should value as we look at development going forward. Is there somewhere we can see that the city has flagged a need for parks? Yeah, so we have basically started doing that through our station area plans. So I believe in the Midtown station area plan, as well as the Rockway station area plan, and I'm not sure if Central has that as well. But we do have areas that have been flagged as a need for parks. And Rockway station area, which is down around the Schneider's plant and the Rockway and the Mill Street station stop, is one area that has been flagged as a need for parks, as well as the Innovation District as well. And I think the intent there is to also say to planners and to parks that when an application comes in, we have two choices. We can either take part of the land as cash in lieu for parkland, and in the parkland requirement, we can take some land and work with the applicant to develop park space. Or if it's not suitable for taking land, we will take money and then reinvest that money into parkland. And so I think what the flagging those areas does in our planning legislation is saying if there's an application that comes in those areas and we are park deficient, it might be wise, if possible, to take land and develop a new park. So those plans have started. Those are our master plans, and that's kind of started the process around where should we be looking at new parks and how can we start the process as a city to acquire these lands necessary to accommodate the needs for everybody going forward in the future. Specifically, as we experience more growth in our urban areas, but also we've noticed there's a tremendous need for this as a result of even the pandemic, knowing that a lot of people live in units that don't have access to amenity space, and therefore park space as well as amenity space is extremely important. Richard, maybe you want to take can you describe the limitations of a coach house?
Yeah, the limitations of a coach house. So generally when we say coach house, we mean like something larger than a shed, but smaller than a house, like maybe a garage that's converted into a new dwelling unit. It'd be typically in someone's backyard. So that's what the city's kind of looking at allowing citywide eventually. And yeah, we're looking at some pretty key limitations that we're going to write into the zoning just to make sure that, you know, somebody can't build a house that's the same size as theirs in their backyard, because we definitely don't want that. So we're looking at things like limiting how big it can be, saying that it has to be much smaller than the main house, limiting how high it can be. So I think we've got a draft height maximum of 6 meters, which would be at most 1.5 stories. So you wouldn't be getting something like a 2-story, 2 or more story coach house, because really the purpose of these is for them to be much smaller and just kind of at the back of the property, a lot less visible than the main house. This is kind of what we would call accessory.
So the next question we have from Mario is regarding affordable housing here in Victoria Park. He said there are a number of areas that could easily be used for modular built housing. If we adopt the Habitat Homes for Humanity or something similar, these areas are inside the Heritage District, and in theory, high rises cannot be built within this zone. So why not do assembled via sweat equity from the residents? Or sorry, why not do a 2-story low-cost factory-built housing assembled via sweat equity from the residents? So that's a great suggestion. If you know, any project like that would have to get off the ground with a group of people that want to do it, whether it's a charity or a developer. And those proposals are great, and they could come in, you know, via one of our planning application processes, and it would be looked at under the similar merits that any application is looked at. That sounds like a great suggestion. I mean, we'd entertain that. I mean, I think even now Richard might be able to elaborate, but I think there are cost reductions in place for affordable housing that have been put in place to try to limit some of the costs in the development applications for affordable housing. So there are some incentives that we currently have in place for affordable housing applications. So sounds like a good one. You would just have to kind of coordinate some of the details around the land and the materials and how it would be built and who's going to build it, that kind of thing. And Dave said he appreciates our comments on low-cost housing. Yeah, I think affordable housing is one of those challenges that, well, I guess it's one of the things that keeps me up at night as a planner, if we have to narrow it down. And I think it's one of the things that we're struggling with across the country as to how we can deliver more affordable housing. It pains me to see cities like Toronto, even Kitchener and Vancouver, becoming unaffordable. And it feels like we're still unable to provide the number of units required to have affordable housing or to provide housing for everybody. So yeah, it's something that we're currently working on, trying to innovate on, and kind of think as a nation on, as well as a province and even locally. So I think we're looking for strategies at all 3 levels. If anyone has any great suggestions, we welcome them and would be interested in hearing more. But Richard and I are trying to work within Kitchener's planning framework to do the best we can here locally. And then Dave said, on the topic of open spaces, I understand there's a big development for the Bram Yards. This could be an opportunity to expand recreational land and park space. So yeah, the city will be looking at the Bram Yards, and that is a great opportunity. We know from the work we've done that there's a deficiency in quality and quantity of park space in the Innovation District. So I agree. I think that we need to seize these opportunities through master planning projects or through large scale developments to create more park space in the city. And I think that's the kind of the great part of some of these larger developments is there's oftentimes adequate parkland that we can take through the planning process. Whereas when a small development comes in, oftentimes they can't provide park and we end up just getting cash in lieu of parkland. Whereas some of these big sites provides us an opportunity to actually get park space and develop at a park. So it's a great idea, and we will be looking at the Bram Yards to provide definitely park space when that development happens. Also, I think a few of you have seen the plans for the Multimodal Hub at King and Victoria, the transit hub that the region is currently engaging on, and it has a large space outside that's a gathering space with formal and informal seating, 2 water features, as well as some greenery. So that will provide some passive recreational opportunities for people in the innovation area. While it's not a full-scale park like Victoria Park, it does provide outdoor recreation. Yeah, planning is a lot. Richard and I have spent, countless years in school to try to understand it all. It's actually challenging for us to try to simplify it. It's a lot easier for me to just kind of pull some of the jargon out that I'm used to using. So it's a great exercise for all of us to try to get the information out there and simplify it and to have a discussion about it. There is a lot. That's kind of why we wanted to keep the course somewhat brief and somewhat focused on the 101, is because it can seem overwhelming and there's a lot to digest. So thank you for being part of this, and you've taken a big first step in learning about what we do here by tuning in today and by being part of the discussion.
Yeah, just to sort of build on that, like as we've kind of talked about, there's a lot of process in planning and a lot of different processes that can sometimes seem confusing or overwhelming or even intimidating, as commented here. And I think that makes sense that it's like that, because there's so many terms and like Dana said, jargon that we use. So yeah, hopefully this has kind of broken it down into a little bit more digestible segments that, when you get a letter in the mail, like we said, or you hear about something, you can kind of feel a little bit more confident if you decide to participate in that, kind of knowing what you're talking about and where it fits in. So hopefully you've been able to get something from the course to achieve that.
So I've been at the city for 7 years now, and even from the time I started till today, I've noticed there's been a tremendous amount of I guess people that have become a lot more engaged in the planning process or engaged in what happens in planning and that want to become involved. And I think this is fantastic. I used to think that when I played SimCity and loved planning that I was kind of the only one, and it's such a pleasure to see everybody else so keen about it. One of the things that we're doing as a city is we're recognizing this, and we're seeing that people really want to become involved in the process and they want to be involved in what is happening, and we're trying to do a better job of getting out into the community, to provide these courses, to simplify our signage, to simplify our letters to citizens, and to simplify our website, and to work at engaging people in a way that's a lot more plain language. And so we have been working over the past year at trying to do some of this, and we will be working over the years coming forward to try to become more approachable as a planning department. I guess less time in our ivory tower and more time in the community. So I thank you for bearing with us and for being part of this, I guess, growth initiative that we're all going through here at the city. So we have about 10 more minutes. Anyone that wants to can type in any further questions, comments, thoughts. We're here, we'll answer them. Otherwise, thank you all for joining. It was a pleasure, and I can't wait till we can do this in person again, because it'll be a lot more fun, I promise.
Got a question from Dave. Could a coach house be built of a 20-foot container house? So that's a good question. I have to look into our regulations again. I want to say no. It would have to be converted into a building and also meet the size requirements that were proposed in the zoning bylaw. So I have to look into that again. But I think the intent is really that it's just kind of either a converted garage that's turned into a house or just a new build. That said, though, I think we are, now that I'm thinking about it, looking at some partnerships to maybe allow like prefabricated coach houses to be an option for people. That could be done fairly easily and economically. So that's definitely the sort of thing that we are looking at.
Yeah, we're trying, in addition to that, we're trying to build kind of a toolkit that has some options for people that are looking for that accessory dwelling unit or additional dwelling unit on their property. So we're trying to make it easy for people to explore those options, which is why one of the things Richard's done is prepared a fact sheet, but also looking at prefabricated options that you could come in and apply for a building permit for if it meets the space. So we're doing some work in the background before the permissions are there to be able to do that, because we've seen as a department, and Richard can probably elaborate a lot more on this, tremendous amount of interest in this topic, specifically as people want to either age in place in their community or maybe live closer to some of their family members.
Yeah, there's definitely we get a ton of inquiries on coach houses or laneway houses, that kind of thing. At least several a day over the last year. So we expect that once they're fully rolled out, so they've just been drafted right now, the rules for them, they're not in place yet. We expect that once they are, we're going to see them built in a big way in Kitchener, so we're excited for that. Yeah, like I think Dana mentioned earlier there, our contact information, we've got Dana's already from the meeting invite. Both of our emails are also in the Q&A chat here. Feel free to reach out to any of us if you just have any general planning or city type questions. We also have our general planning inbox, just planning@kitchener.ca. And if we can't help you, we probably can point you in the right direction. We always try to respond to people. It's our corporate policy to kind of get back to people within, a day or two, and we're usually pretty good with that. So you should expect a response pretty quickly from us.
And thanks to everyone who's kind of taking the time tonight. And when we roll out the, I guess, the first year of courses, which will be coming out in January or in early 2021, I guess it would be appreciated if you know, you guys could champion this from a community perspective, or, you know, if others are looking to learn more, that you can let them know that this is happening. We will be, you know, putting more information about the future courses out on social media, on the website, and have more enrollment. But I mean, word of mouth obviously carries a lot of weight. And if you know of anyone that's looking to become more involved or looking to learn more about planning, feel free to let them know that this is happening. And as we move forward, we can try to roll this out on a much bigger scale. So we're gonna wrap this up in the next 5 minutes or so. If anyone has any last burning questions, feel free to send them our way. Otherwise, we will sign off for the night, and you can reach us, as Richard mentioned, by email. All right, seeing no more questions, I think Richard and I will call it a night. Do you have anything else to add before we sign off, Richard?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, thanks again, everyone, for participating, and great questions for us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much. Have a good evening.